It was in Much Marcle that Fred met his first wife, a Scottish teenager named Rena Costello, and they moved to Scotland. Questions remain over whether Fred started killing here.
We know he lived in Glasgow, we know he had this allotment on some waste ground, and we know that in conversation with the police and with friends and family like his son Steve, that he talked about his Scottish connection. I think that was Fred's phrase, and he inferred darkly that in fact there were victims in Glasgow whom he murdered and buried, as he did in Gloucester.
Fred and Rena first moved to Coatbridge. Nearby lived two notorious and now dead paedophiles. One was a church elder, a man called James Gallogley. The other was convicted child rapist Alexander Gartshore. Only a few weeks ago, Scottish prosecutors named him as a child killer. He befriended Fred West, according to Gartshore's daughter, who has investigated her father's paedophile connections.
My dad would be 10 years older than Jimmy Gallogley. Fred West would be younger than Jimmy Gallogley. But my mother never understood what the friendship was about. I have no idea how paedophiles in those days would have found each other. It's very clear that now the internet plays a big part in that.
More evidence of Fred West's Scottish crime links emerged from Peterhead prison 4 years after his suicide. In a deathbed confession from his cell, James Gallogley allegedly named Fred as part of a 1960s paedophile ring which preyed on girls from a troubled background.
I think this gang preyed on that type of child, knowing that questions would not be asked.
Did you see Fred West's name in the extracts?
Yes, I did.
Fred West later moved to Glasgow. A motorway interchange has long since obliterated his old home and the allotment he tended.
When one looked at the time Fred was in Glasgow, and if you go through the files of missing persons, I recall there were at least 4 girls of the type whom he later abducted and murdered, who went missing whilst he was in Glasgow.
In 1965, Fred left Glasgow in a hurry after knocking down and killing a young boy.
His job in Glasgow was to drive an ice cream van, and there was this extraordinary story that he ran down and killed a child with this van, which there was much talk about that, and indeed that would be perhaps his first victim if that was true.
Fred and Rena's violent on-off relationship came to a head when she joined him in Gloucestershire and found him living with a pregnant Anne McFall. By July 1967, Fred had killed Anne, and during this time 8 violent sex attacks were committed on young women in the area.